Governor General, Grand Chief Sebob Dadai, Madam Dadai, PNG Prime Minister, Honorable James Marape, Madam Marape, my surviving hero, my mother, Lady Veronica Somare, my elder fearless siblings, Walter Tamana Mary, Betha Sana, Arthur Michael, Emma, Papa Paul, na Kaki, Rosa, na Helen. Ministers of State, Host Governor, MKA Chair, community leaders, Papua New Guinea. Good afternoon, family and friends. Adorai, namuna tawi manima bona pese. Abinun trol mana mereli na family bami. Bewari trol sa iplakan bungo sem lo dislatai lo loksalo papa country. Papa bami tunga Grand Chief Sir Michael Somare. Tasami homas tu sem yupla tu or people lo Papua New Guinea. Yupla tu or bikini blem no tumuna blem. Na planti pri yupla or patasusa blem. Yupla kan lo toka mamas na gim luksare. No life na wok lo pa blemi. Thank you yupla lo kambungo sem lo san. Ating so strangu lo like lo papaya tembasta yet lo banisi mipla na strongi mipla. Olgeta lo beli country bamemela, lo soy pasin, na biayan mo put pa pasin, lo custom lo bamemela, all one people blame. The subject classic can say winning mem on February 26, na I'm passing my blame now, na I'm losing my happiness. Late yesterday afternoon, I watched my father, the late great Grand Chief Sir Michael Somare, enter and leave our national parliament for the last time. From 1982, when the Australians gifted that building to us, he would always walk proudly through its doors. Yesterday, he was carried into the chamber, and as he lay in state, I fought back the tears and memories of all that he had dreamed, then built, then left for us to complete. Later, I walked with my elder siblings behind the hearse as he was driven with a collection of his medals outside, out the front gates and past Independence Hill and Mirrigini House and the museum in the distance, and then onto Somare Circuit. I was proud of the fact that each one of those buildings and infrastructure I've just named were either designed and established by him or built in his memory, as in the major arterial road that is the Somare Circuit today outside our National Parliament House. I wept bittersweet tears for all that he had left behind and all that he had abruptly left for us to do. Yesterday was a hard day, sitting in Parliament, a building so familiar to me and my mother and my siblings. I heard wonderful tributes from my father's peers. Papa Chan spoke of a lifelong friendship, and Papa Winti lamented over a mentor and friend he treasured and will greatly miss. PNG politics, as they remembered it, was about strong values as much as it was about contest and rivalry. I will miss that with my father's passing. So many great memories flooded my mind as I was reminded of all my father's masterful achievements. While many of these memories were familiar, thousands more that flooded social and traditional media were now stunning tributes and glowing compliments about the work ethic and the quality of our dear father's relationships with many of you, his people. Our Prime Minister, Honourable James Marape, referred to the late Grand Chief, my beloved father, as a bulldozer yesterday, which makes perfect sense actually, as we have always joked that my mother was the handbrake, without ever referring to or imagining our father as a bulldozer. It's well known that my father was born in Rabaul, East Hebridean Province, on the 9th of April in 1936, to Dulciana Somare, my grandfather, and Painadi Somare, my biological grandmother. My grandfather was a policeman, and from stories told to me, he was a generous and giving man with many admirable traits, including the DNA for service. I will never know if my grandparents were disciplinarians or strong Christians or even good parents. They both passed on before I was born. What I do know is that they raised a humane, thinking, honourable and decent man in my father, and for that I am truly grateful. Today is a bittersweet day for my dear family. We come here to farewell our patriarch, our protector and our human shield, in the place where he stood to raise our flag of liberation all those years ago for our new nation. It was here that he made his mark on this land, the land of plenty, brimming with godly gifts and natural resources that requires our care and respect now. My father saw this, the land that always had the capacity to propel us into the next century as a truly politically and economically independent nation. My father would have envisaged this great wealth, but he saw this wealth in his people and not in the riches of the land and sea. He strove for harmony and solidarity as the foundation for the nation building he championed through instinct and passion. My father was a decent man, and that provided him with the moral compass and trajectory needed to rise above the conflict that great national wealth can bring to any nation. He followed his heart before his mind, and in my view, that was the only way to truly unite our diverse country. His custom, our Sama tradition, was his rudder. When he set sail in his traditional canoe, our mungai, on this country's life journey, he was Yamdar, our totem that is capable of great good and such malevolence too. Sana is a way of life that my father chose each time he faced hardship and conflict. He chose to show affection to garner trust, but this enviable human trait was used against him in the end, and he was vilified and treated very poorly and publicly, as he was deemed weak because he pledged as a young man during his own initiation to live a compassionate life. I am proud my country was able to benefit from his personal choices and our strong Murid tradition. We found out on Friday the 12th of February 2021 the awful diagnosis that my father had terminal cancer. It was pancreatic cancer. My family learnt the hard way that this form of cancer only fully manifests itself often when it's too late. His doctors in PNG had discovered massive lesions in his pancreas that they could not treat or remove, firstly from a lack of real institutional capacity and the essential clinical and medical infrastructure needed to competently treat cancer today in our country. Sadly, we were left with simply no options. I could not wish that level of hopelessness on any family member of a well-loved parent. Our father was a simple and modest man all his life. Despite my own ideas about fame and the perks and privileges of sharing a high-profile life with him, he always lived to reflect a life balance I've never seen manifested by another person again in my life. Dada always played down his achievements against our plans as a family. He never held up his own massive contributions to this country as achievements. In his passing, I believe he did this with purpose, so that his prolific leadership would never overshadow us, so that we too could progress with stability, protected always by his prolific reputation. I have had a wonderful life filled with pioneering experiences, from the heady days of political independence to the signing of LNG agreements to witnessing the establishment of 2 new provinces. under my father's fearless guidance. Mine was a life of privilege, facilitated by two very decent, humble and visionary people, my parents, the late Sir Michael, and my beloved mother, Lady Veronica Somare. Dada made me believe I could do anything within the backdrop of his own very high-profile accomplishments. I never felt in my life that I was not enough. He never gave me that impression. In fact, being raised by this great man, I only ever felt that my life was the only one that mattered. That, of course, came with its own set of problems, and fortunately, my dear mother Veronica always quickly neutralised the risk of us all getting ahead of ourselves. She always ensured that we did not think ourselves overtly special or above anyone else. As the Chief Minister's children from 1973, we were subjected to strict rules and household regulations defined authoritarian style by my dear mother. Despite incredible pre-independence and sole government support for domestic and ancillary staff to attend to our daily needs in the official residence of the Chief Minister at Karai Place in Baroko, my mother Veronica championed the grounding and discipline we needed as children, and there were 6 of us, at a critical time in our lives so that we would emerge to respect and honour rules, order and authority as a template for later life. My mother did this at home while my father took on the challenge of continuously advocating for full independence. He drove a change agenda as the political figurehead so that we would adopt and be protected by the features of nationhood, including our own government, our own authority, and our own legitimacy, to enact laws and define development and growth on our own terms within the parameters of the then newly adopted Westminster system. Thinking back now, as a child, when we were moved from house to house with short notice as my father lost in votes of no confidence against him, we were guided by the fact that my parents honoured process. Mirrigini House, the official residence of the PNG Prime Minister, was a wonderful, almost fictional home to grow up in as a child. We loved its location and its charm, and it was our first true family home, even though by political design it wasn't. In that home we received presidents, prime ministers, royalty and regular citizens. I'm grateful for the balance my parents struck in those days. In our upbringing, we were disciplined, we had fun, we experienced great triumphs, and there was also such sadness there too. But through it all, we were prepared daily for public life and prolific responsibilities while being trained to acknowledge the efforts of staff and all those who contributed to our immense comfort. There are no words for these special gifts that only stable parents can offer their children. In later years, when Dada became PM again, we enjoyed visiting that stately manor with our own children and our own families. I want to say this: my father's leadership was shared with us in such a humble way that the lessons will never be lost, as we were never forced to be anyone other than ourselves. Whatever we have chosen after this fact have been our adult decisions once we left the care and fortitude of our parents' home as young adults. My parents cushioned us against all nature of trials and those very public challenges. My father drove change in PNG in a way that suggests to me today that his genetic coordinates were set according to a timeless and selfless vision that factored in our diverse lineage and cultural heritage as very distinct humans. Contrary to the opinions of our colonial masters and critics, my father always envisaged us as one people, one nation, and one country. I'm proud to say my father, Michael Somare, dreamed Papua New Guinea into existence. My father was a stencil for the greater good over different generations in this country. He was a chameleon with a special gift of being able to blend in yet stand out so completely when it mattered. I understand better at my age now what drove this man, my father, to be the greatest shock absorber this country has ever seen. In the last 10 years, when he was confronted with the most public opposition he had ever faced in his entire political career and personal life, he handled it with the grace and patience of a saint. I watched my father, the Grand Chief, consider all the obvious risks to this country at that time and the risks to his people before he worried about what was happening to him personally. For the record, at his passing, I want to say that my father was unlawfully removed as a legitimate Prime Minister. He cared less about revenge or retaliation when the options were at his fingertips. He exercised incredible caution despite his frail state after his return from Singapore. He feared that any bad decision on his part would have had such lasting and adverse effect on this nation that he merely accepted his fate and he never defended himself beyond a certain point. Soul, as a guide in the exercise of power, authority and legitimacy in the face of immense anxiety, confusion and tension. My father upheld parliamentary democracy and constitutional democracy over himself and his family's future. He healed himself enough to contest yet another election in 2012 before his retirement in 2017 on his own terms. Many have asked why. The answer, the true essence of participatory democracy, was his guiding light from before independence to well after he achieved much of his dreams for us, his people. He allowed his journey to be broken so we could continue with ours. My dear father said, "The people have spoken. There will be no more fighting." Metaphorically, he put down his weapons. In retrospect, when I consider my father's great love for this country, I strongly believe now that he believed that knowing when to stop conflict is not defeat, it was leadership. At home, he also provided comfort and solace in the face of any tension and torment. I feel that he always felt guilty to a degree as our lives were so public because of his political choices, and therefore he always overcompensated in very personal ways by being gentle, loving, generous, and most of all, modest. Thankfully, in his care, we never witnessed violence, aggression, or inequality in our home. To him, his children, we each had the same rights, both as male and female. My father understood innately what equality looked like in practice. Even when our customs and our ancient traditions and his modern political profile glorified status and a hierarchy. In our home, my father worshipped our mother all the way to his passing last month. Therefore, our house was always a home underpinned by certainty, despite some normal family differences along the way. Dada understood the importance of freedom in nationhood. He felt a responsibility to provide that invisible yet real support to a nation as he embraced what it meant to be free. He forgave people who brought harm, humiliation, and intense conflict, as he himself had originally offered them the right to act and speak and to think independently when he fought fearlessly over different phases of our democracy for both our political and economic independence. I say this again with a bittersweet understanding of the intentions he drove and designed that now exist in our own PNG Constitution. He became the driver of the political architects who envisaged change, growth and development with him. My father's close friendship with his mentor and lifelong friend, Uncle Sir Cecil Abel, provided him with the civility and calm that was needed to temper the transition from self-government to full independence. My father would fondly refer to his friend in later years in terms that suggested that Uncle Sir Cecil was a great influence on him through a period of transition that could have changed the course of our history if egos and self-indulgence had dominated their thinking. Many other strong influences in my father's life included Sir Peter Smogun, Sir Peter Lus, Sir Paul Lepun, Tony Vutis, Sir John Momus, Sir Peter Barter. There were, of course, many more throughout the 50 years of his political career. My father also deeply trusted the value of women in this country. My dear late Auntie Naha Rooney was appointed the Minister for Forests in the first cabinet after independence. My father surrounded himself with strong women like Jennifer King, Marie Simmons, Meg Taylor, Jean Kikedo, Winnie Kiap, and his own Betha Somare. In later years, when he became Prime Minister again from 2002, he insisted on a cabinet lineup that faced resistance when he proposed Dame Carol Kidu be a Minister of State. Dame Carol reminds us today that my father told his cabinet that having her in the National Executive Council was not negotiable. Under his supportive direction, Dame Carol spearheaded many policies and legislation that promised greater protections for women, girls, and minority groups. As I look back, I understand my father's sincerity to this cause. He practiced the values of equality and gender empowerment in our home. I was raised to think as an equal, not as a gender. My father's parting wish to me and my siblings was that our children go to university and work hard. From his sickbed, he urged me and my siblings to convince him that we would always be okay. Daughters would go on to complete their education and be protected by all that he had already established for me and therefore for the two of them. From the beginning of his public life to the end, he valued education. After all, he was a teacher and a broadcaster before he became a parliamentarian. His service to communities built the foundation for the solidarity and unity we have witnessed in the outpouring of love and sincerity at his passing. My father was a true agent for change. He understood our people and our ways when others refused to. He was in love with the ideals of nationhood when few dared to dream with him. I saw the care my father took in understanding and honouring the strictures of the system that had worked so hard, that he had worked so hard to set up in our country. I am filled with pride as I recall his handling of his power and authority. He did not set out to wield power. He did not set out to wield the power he held as the four-time CEO of this country. My father knew, and he still wore the scars of the struggles he endured to earn the right to run an entire country. Without the education he gave me, endured prejudice and intense hostility during a period of great racial divide in the world from the 1950s in what was then a colonial territory of Australia. He borrowed from African experiences in Tanzania and Zambia in the 1970s to mould his own dream for our rights-based system that today enables freedoms like free speech, free media, and the right to assembly. I think I'm most proud of my father's courage. He battled against division and institutional policies designed to segregate and demean our people as recently as the 1960s and the 1970s. He rebelled against accepting the systematic policies of racial segregation imposed upon us by successive colonial governments. Our people, popularly referred to as natives, were methodically oppressed and given few rights, despite laws and policies proposing otherwise. My father resented the lack of consultation with our people during colonial rule. He never understood or agreed to being treated as subhuman. And again, to borrow a phrase, my father was a prototype nationalist. Today, as we enjoy the benefits of full independence and the accompanying advantages of rights-based privileges devolved from international treaties and conventions, we must honour the gift of the intentions and aspirations behind these nationalist protections. In 2021, when our landowners are consulted ahead of major impact projects on their land and sea, we must never forget that the right to be heard was not always a right in this country. Today, when we comment publicly and politically about confronting issues and current affairs, we must never forget that having an opinion in this country once attracted unwelcome attention and punitive sanctions. Service at shops, hotels, restaurants and bars were not always available to us, the Indigenous people of Papua New Guinea. And importantly, we were divided into protectorates and territories with different rules and laws that can't have been easy to bring together under a single system that would cater for a peoples with over 1,000 tribes, languages and customs. I want to remember my father in this way for his vision and faith in himself, carry the burden of hope that one day we would define our own way in the world through effective trade and economic cooperation, bilateral and multilateral treaties and commercial agreements and public policies that today enshrine his perennial wish for his people to participate in their own political, economic and social development and independence. Today we are protected by the values embedded in the respected principles of free and prior informed consent, FPIC, that govern the protection of the rights of our Indigenous people through the requisite dialogue and consensus that reinforces our constitutional rights to the sharing of benefits in the exploitation of all of our natural resources in this country. My father's early vision aligns with these pillars governing FPIC and its application in fora, including mining development forums, greenfield and brownfield negotiations, fisheries and forestry and trade negotiations, and all other consultations involving our people and their constitutional rights to benefit from the access and use of our land and sea. It is the expression of these constitutional rights that my father fought to continuously embed in our institutional thinking. He wanted our rights to be signposted and embossed in the mind's eye of all foreign and local investors and decision makers who endeavour to develop our vast natural resources. He can't have fully known that we would have had the resource capacity to grow our GDP into a multi-billion-dollar economy today, but he championed the basis of these opportunities anyway to guarantee our economic independence one day. Today, as we enjoy our rights as landowners or property owners and business owners, we are no longer spectators in our own land. We take for granted the right to have a PNG driver's licence and a PNG passport, even a birth certificate or a tax file number. Today, we justifiably treat education and health like a right, owed to us by the state or the government, but we must never ever forget that our own warrior fought hard against a colonial system so that today we would have the right to act, speak, and be recognised as citizens in the independent state of Papua New Guinea. Our job now is to ensure that the fruits of this labour are not lost, that we hyphenate our rights by installing our own quality people to run good government to continue into the next 5 decades and beyond. As his children, we have few regrets. Our father remained with us for an extraordinary period of time to the age of 84. He fit in a lifetime of triumphs that cannot be comprehensively expressed within a single eulogy. But I want to say this: at the centre of my father's political longevity was a single chiefly skill that few people possess or will master. My father was a good listener. From this one great gift emerged his undeniable ability to create trust, embolden relationships, and reciprocate loyalty with grace. As a great listener, he was able to charismatically charm people whilst delivering his eternal message of great faith and hope for his first true love, Papua New Guinea. My father's basic formula relied on an innate tendency to become invisible so that others could be. His strength in remaining cordial and civil, even through the most trying of political conflicts in this country, in my view, saved our country from sliding into chaos and anarchy or civil conflict. The lesson in his passing is that we will not truly recover from such political conflict again unless we make an honest commitment to never inflict that level of internal harm on each other again. Finally, my father was disgusted at the thought of some of our Indigenous people being deemed citizens or colonial subjects of the British Protectorate and later Australian subjects without the citizenship rights granted to other British subjects and Australian citizens from as far back as 1906. I am certain that my father became fixated with the promise of citizenship and the accompanying rights he witnessed others enjoy at the expense of his own people prior to independence. I regret that I was too young to understand the reality of the bigotry he faced at the hands of officials charged with the unbelievable task of applying an extension of the White Australia policy in our land, then an Australian territory. Throughout these challenging years, he protected our family whilst he fought for everyone else's. For this, I will always be truly and profoundly grateful that my father, Michael Tom, as he was referred to in those early days, was a fearless and fierce warrior. He could never stomach the fact that he was continuously being berated in his own land. Australian author and columnist Rowan Callick referred to my father as a political survivor. In a recent article, he went on to suggest that Dada was the embodiment of our hope as a country. Callick referred to him as a daring troublemaker who dared to dream of independence from the 1960s. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison honoured our father's legacy by flying flags in Australia on half-mast this week, a gesture rarely offered to passing dignitaries from this, our Pacific Islands region. I understand the death of the late Nelson Mandela was the last time this honour was bestowed on a non-Australian. This is a very private rendition of his memory. I have read and seen many in the last few weeks when we shared the news that my father had fallen ill. Millions of Papua New Guineans and global friends and peers shared a memory, an event, a feeling, their sadness, their joy of independence, and their heartfelt desperation at the loss of our. Yes, we are thankful, and on behalf of my late father, my mother, Lady Veronica, and my 5 older siblings and our families, we want to express our complete gratitude for making this tremendous time of mourning and sadness bearable for us. We are forever indebted to you all. My elder siblings have worked tirelessly to negotiate with the state the safe passage of our father home to his final resting place in our beloved Isipik province. My sister Betha in particular must be thanked for her ongoing courage in leading our family as the eldest through a series of frightening medical and political traumas we faced with our parents in the last 12 years. I acknowledge my elder brothers Sana and Arthur for their instinct in helping to guide my father in his recent tumultuous political tenure as Prime Minister from 2002. I thank my brother Michael Jr. for always carrying out my father's wishes for us to remain in East Sepik Province. To my sister Emma for her undying faith that provided the basis for my father's earlier medical, and for her well-raised children who show up when times are tough. Rodney Camus, your support always made my father happy when we couldn't. Thank you, Seki Karingirl, my parents' first child. Without you, my parents couldn't have raised us, educated us, and provided for us and us, his children, so competently whilst attempting to run a nation. And of course, to my hero, my mother, the silent backstop, the driver, the maid, the cook, the cleaner, the disciplinarian, and the matriarch who worshipped my father even when his journey became confusing to her. To our beloved Papua New Guinea, the national house cry in Port Moresby, Lae, Wewak and elsewhere in the country that was so well attended by so many of you, we feel your pain. Our own loss is so complete, but with your energy and love, we have elevated our father's wish and his dream to well-recorded tributes that will be remembered for many generations to come. Even in death, our beloved Father is guiding us, I know, to come together in prayer and in peace as one for the sake of Papua New Guinea. Dada, I thank you for finding the inner peace to carry the burden of hope always for our complex and diverse country. I thank you for dedicating your life to service and for providing your paternal love to us, your children, and to your people. I will miss you terribly for the rest of my days, yet I am filled with the hope now that your memory will be preserved in love. Dewan Tunga Papa, your triumphs will remain the invisible hand that leads us, your people, to always fight the good fight in good faith and always with goodwill. Kujanga.